Hello everyone, and welcome to Sadurdays. As always, I have a series of short stories or other content with which to share with you today. In this case, I went back to the Reedsy Blog, as they've been a rich source of content for me over this time. And so this time I was looking at more entries for contest number 98 in response to write a story involving a character who cannot return home. And I found one by Ailika Motani for this one. It's called Someday. Tags are science fiction and sad. Home is where the heart is by Gaius Plinius Secundus is the opening quote. It was time to turn around and head back. After 3 long days of the radar's inactive beeping, Spencer was tired of waiting. If he'd had his way, he'd have left 2 days ago, but he was under strict orders to stay. Clarkson supposedly had some gut instinct, and there was someone stranded there. While Spencer knew full well that Clark's gut instinct was bogus, he also knew that the same nasally voice that nagged out orders at him through his earpiece could issue the command to terminate him in an instant. That's why Spencer was so relieved when the message came through to him. You may abort the mission, Spencer. There's obviously no one there. He steered the slate craft out of the dwarf planet's orbit and prepared to create a portal back to headquarters. Finally, after a week, his aching legs would have a chance to stand on solid ground. Just as he was about to open the portal, the radar picked up a signal. So there is someone here, he sighed. The solid ground would have to wait. He swung his ship back around and followed the signal back to the dwarf planet. It seemed to be coming from the crater in the planet's surface. Maneuvering onto the planet's surface was not an easy feat, but it was routine for someone who spent their time rescuing people stranded in galaxies far from home. Someone like Spencer. He gently eased the ship under a low-lying ledge of the rock. Putting on a bulky spacesuit, Spencer stepped out of the craft into the bitter cold, windy atmosphere. Sand flew everywhere, making it difficult to make anything more than a meter away. How could someone survive in these temperatures without protection? Spencer wondered, half hoping his rescue wasn't frozen to death by the time they were found. Rescuee, rather, wasn't frozen to death by the time they were found. Hello, hello, anybody here? Spencer bellowed up between his suit and the wind. Nothing could be heard. He waited for hours, but the landscape didn't seem to change at all. The ledge where his ship was parked was getting smaller and smaller until it was only a dot in the distance. And then nothing at all. Without any sense of direction anymore, Spencer was completely and absolutely lost. There was no sign of the person who sent the signal or what they sent it with. There was only one thing Spencer could do, and that was to turn around 180 degrees and head back the way he came. That was his best chance. But then he saw it in the distance. There stood a small makeshift satellite dish. Who'd built it? Were they still alive somehow? Half of Spencer wanted to just ignore it and return to his ship. There was nothing he wanted more than to get out of that place. Yet still, he hastily headed towards the structure. As he approached the satellite dish, he saw a figure sitting on the ground next to it. Hello, excuse me, sir, madame, he called towards it, but it didn't respond. It just stayed in its hunched-up position, curled into a ball. I'm here to rescue you. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a heavy woolen coat and boots. Her skin was blue from the cold, and where her chest should have been heaving up and down, it was still. Her sea-green eyes were open and glossed over, looking at the sky as her hands clasped in a prayer. It was a haunting sight to behold. Spencer walked around her, being careful not to disturb her of the belongings that were scattered around her. He continued looking around, walking beyond the corpse, not daring to glance back at it. He didn't even know where he was going. He just needed to get away from there. But as he walked, a strange thing happened. The air seemed to get warmer and warmer until it was almost room temperature. Hello? Please let there be someone here, Spencer shouted one final time. He was almost too tired to go on, but his cry was met with silence. Hello, came a meek voice from behind him. Spencer almost screamed in shock. A young child in a ragged cloak was suddenly standing behind him. He looked like the woman who froze to death. Hey there, Spencer said, half laughing, half crying. Is there anyone else with you? My mother, he whispered as if he was telling a secret. Where's your mother? Spencer asked, but he already knew the answer to that. She went outside into the cold place. She told me to stay here no matter what. There was longing in the boy's voice. How long ago was that, dear? A few days ago. Spencer fought to blink back tears. How could he tell an innocent child that he doesn't have a mother anymore? Wait here just a minute, okay? I'll be back in a few minutes. Don't leave this warm area. Don't go, please. My mother said exactly that, and she never came back. The boy clasped Spencer's hand tightly. I need to go get a present for you, okay? A present? What is it? Surprise, you'll find out later, but for now you'll have to stay here. Spencer lied. It was a small white lie, but he hated lying to small impressionable children. The boy thought about it for a second, then he nodded and let go of Spencer's hand. Spencer stepped back into the cold, harsh outside world, quickly located his ship and flew back to the haven of warmth. Is this my present? The boy exclaimed in joy, running up to the spacecraft. Yes, now get him, we have to go. What about my mother? Your mother's in a better place. Will I ever see her again? Someday. I know, I'm Emily Clarkson. I'll be your new mother. She called herself his mother, but it was just a ruse. His mother had calloused hands from cooking and working, and they stroked his forehead with the gentility of a feather. Emily's hands were baby-smooth, soft hands that had not done a day of work in their lives. They were ice-cold. Just call me Mom. He called his mother Mom because she was his mother. He could never call Emily Mom. Welcome to your new home, Noah. They called it home, but the word had no meaning anymore. Home had always been where his mother would cook him 3 meals a day, where she tucked him into bed every night and read him bedtime stories. Not this expansive large mansion with 106 different rooms and a chandelier in the dining room. Home was a whole world away, but maybe, just maybe, he'd get there. Someday. And that was someday. Final thoughts? Very sad and very to the point for the most part. I mean, I hardly know what to say about this particular piece other than the obvious. You know, we got what seems like a mission that was about to be aborted, but then suddenly the protagonist in it comes to find a child whose mother has been frozen, but how can he tell him the truth? Especially when he's so young. I mean, it's like, to know that you could instill a sense of mourning in one so young and innocent as to not fully come to grips with what death actually is. It's just unimaginable for some. But all in all, a very well-written piece, and I'd be curious to see if they've done any more works on the site. With that, I turn us to our second of 3 stories, called Of All the Ways to Run Away, also submitted for contest number 98 in response to write a story involving a character who cannot return home, by A.J. Ball. Categories: fiction, sad, teen, and young adult. He still has $358.20 left, all in cash, of course. Recent experience has told him that he's not the type of person to have a credit card. If he had one of those, he'd probably be home right now, wherever that is. The dusty building in front of him would be the 3rd cheap motel he stayed in since he woke up at the rest stop after getting off the first bus. That was a week ago now. A week ago, he'd lifted his head from the wooden picnic table, chips of paint falling from his head in pale blue flakes. There'd been no cars in the parking lot, just him and a ratty backpack and the noise of the wind reaching through a sparse stand of trees, bare branches rattling in the chill breeze. The only evidence of his current location was a map of Arkansas on the back of the door to the public bathroom. There was a little red star near the bottom of the map saying, "You are here," in a cheery cursive font. Following the asphalt lane back to the highway just showed a bigger road, with few cars passing by. There wasn't even something as simple as a speed limit sign to help him decide which way to go. Lacking any evidence of amenities in either direction, he picked one and started walking along the side of the road. A motel came into view surprisingly quickly, and he went inside. The bell jingled anemically when the door swung closed behind him. It was stiflingly warm and dim inside, and the lady behind the check-in desk seemed to blend into the wall behind them. She were lit mostly by the phone in her hand, and she didn't look up until he reached the desk. $85 a night, she said, her eyes flicking up briefly, then back to the phone. He peeled off 5 20s, still slightly stuck together from what must have been a sticky, chocolatey breakfast, judging from the brown smudges. The lady behind the desk took the money and gave him the change without another word. Stepping back into the brisk afternoon, shivering, he found his room quickly. The hotel used old-fashioned keys, and the door stuck when it opened. It stuck worse when it closed, but he didn't care. He was tired. He immediately turned the thermostat up and let his backpack fall with a soft thump as he flopped onto bed. Sinking into the mattress, he let his fatigue settle over him. Whatever he was doing before he got on that bus, it must have exhausted him down to his bones. Yet he still found the energy to run. I can't stay here, and he bolts from the room. The funeral had been a small private affair, his parents' bodies in their coffins at the front, friends and family scattered behind him. He barely spoke to any of them. After the service, his sister went up to speak with the funeral director. He'd been left alone in the room, alone with his parents, his bodies, alone with two corpses that he still had trouble believing were once his family. That's when he ran, bursting into the hill, winter air. His frantic steps slowed just a few yards past the doors. Stumbles to a walk, heaving great burning breaths. When he had started breathing so hard, there's a park at the end of the street. He sinks into the swing to catch his breath. His knees are nearly at his ears with how low the swings are, but it's better than sitting on the freezing ground. The funeral home is just barely visible from there, but it's still close. His sister won't have a reason to worry too much about him. She knows him and knows that he tends to wander even on happy days. She knows to give him space. She'll text him when she's ready to head back to the house. He doesn't go back to the funeral home. He doesn't respond to his sister's text messages. In fact, he doesn't even have his phone anymore. He doesn't know where he dropped it. Getting on the bus was a stupid decision. He's sitting on the bus as it travels to a destination he's already forgot. All the while, he's steering without seeing at the road passing by and trying to reckon with what he's done. Frustration kept distracting him. Frustration at his shitty feelings, at the fact that he got on this goddamn bus in the first place. No luggage, just a backpack with a change of clothes for Jim, a bottle of water, and a notebook half filled with haphazard notes from last year's classes. Does he even have his wallet? So wrapped up in his thoughts, he doesn't even notice the person who sits next to him. When he finally startles to awareness, they don't give him a name. They just ask him a question. He won't remember their question or his answer, but he doesn't want to anyway. That's the whole point of him running in the first place, and the whole point of them sitting next to him and asking him that question. He doesn't a thing after they shove a wad of paper-wrapped wad of money into his pocket. At the next stop, the person who'd sat next to him was gone. At his current hotel, he's sitting in yet another dingy bread spread, eating another dinner of gas station snacks. Tossing the wrappers in the trash, he tugs the dampened, crumpled paper from the pocket of his jeans and unfolds it to see the message sprawled on it. He's read it before, but was just too tired to think of anything moving forward. Now he finally has enough distance from whatever he's running from to think clearly. The paper is mostly blank, just an address in a sentence fragment, smudged by his frequent handling over the past few days. It's still legible, though. He knows where to go. Below the address, all that was written was, "When you're ready." And that was... well, that story title I just mentioned. Final thoughts? It's interesting. What stood out to me was that, okay, someone who he doesn't know just gave him a piece of paper, so the question is that someone that's looking to adopt him? Is that possibly a relative of his that found out where he was going but didn't want to spook him, so they just gave him directions on how to get to them? Or could it be something else? Could it, so much ambiguity there. That being said, I'm not quite sure that it entirely qualifies with he can't go home. At least not in a literal sense, because it seems like they could go home. The question is, to which home would they go back? Are they really in as much peril as they think with this? Anyway, those are just my impressions from it all. And now for our last story of this episode, Who's Home? Submitted for contest number 98 in response to Reddit story involving a character who cannot return home, by Amber Willis. She was Daddy's little princess. She wasn't spoiled by any means, but Hozuchi, affectionately called Little Who by her family, was most certainly top dog in her family. She loved hunting with her dad, Nino. Together they could take down anything. Elk didn't stand a chance against this dynamic duo, whose mom, Kay, was the alpha female and leader of the pack, gracefully and tactfully leading the family and keeping harmony with all. Oh sure, they've had clashes with rival packs over territory, but everything always worked out fine. The family was safe and secure in their cavern, snuggled deep inside Yellowstone Park. I think I know where that is. I certainly am in the state for it. Hozuchi stretched and yawned in the deep orange glow of sunset. She looked over the valley and watched a family of elk grazing peacefully near the river. Who was not hunting? He had feasted well on a carcass Kay had supplied earlier that day. He was just enjoying watching the other animals prattle along in their lives. All animals intrigued her, curious little critters scurrying up, trees and loud singers soaring in the sky. She especially enjoyed watching the hairless creatures who visited this park in little packs of their own, bustling around on two legs. How did they manage to get around as well as they did, though clumsy, not elegant whatsoever, on just two stubby legs? Awoo! Little Who turned to see her little sister Joy calling into the evening sky. Joy paused and listened, her black hair shining in the downing sun. She called again and listened. Soft howling reply came from nearby. Joy wagged her tail and trotted off, answering the call to welcome back her twin sister, Gracie, who watched her younger sisters in the distance, licking each other tenderly and wagging their long tails. She loved her sisters dearly, but sometimes those two liked to exclude Who in their adventures. Who was proud of them. They were strong and beautiful, though not nearly as much as Who herself. Someday they would leave to find a new pack of their own, raising their own magnificent pups. Who was next in line to be alpha female of her pack, after her sweet mother, Who took pride in her family and strove to defend them and keep them well fed. Who stepped into the family cavern and greeted her mother and father, licking them and nuzzling them gently. Kay was expecting. Her belly was just starting to swell. Who laid down next to Kay, sniffing and licking her mother's gray face. She stared into Kay's huge, gorgeous brown eyes. She was lost in those loving eyes. Who began to remember her grandfather. Kay's father had those same eyes. He told Who stories of when she was a young pup, scampering over him and chomping on his gray ears. Her favorite story was of how long ago humans came into wolf territory far in the north. They searched eagerly for the strongest wolves, capturing them and journeying with them south to the park. The humans freed the wolves, hoping they would help them in a battle with the elk that had overtaken and were destroying the park. The mighty wolves became defenders of the park, watching the humans but never harming them. Who loved that story. She was honored to be a defender of the park and to help the awkward two-legged humans with the scrumptious elk. Who drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the little humans strolling along in her park. The next day, Who and her parents arose earlier and set out to patrol the land. They played and licked each other as they journeyed. Nino nuzzled his mate from time to time. They were content and marched on as the day grew older. Who and her parents had unknowingly wandered outside of the park borders. How can animals tell where humans lay arbitrary borders? The trio trotted on merrily. Who watched her parents admiringly and kept a protective eye on their pregnant mother. They stopped by a cool, babbling creek for a drink. Who shoved her thick, furry face into the cool wetness, lapping eagerly and enjoying the freshness on her face. A dragonfly hovered above the creek, its four legs batting crazily near Who's soggy face. Bang! The sky screamed, echoing around the trees. Who leaped with alarm. Thunder? No storms were brewing. Her heart pounded deep in her chest, adrenaline filling her system. The sky screamed again. Bang! Who ran quickly back towards the path they'd come, fleeing the ear-splitting boom. The air vibrated with the deafening noise. Whose throat dried as her heart pounded. Her legs aching and longing to go faster. Something was wrong. She ran further, panicking at the sudden change and fleeing in terror. She spotted a crevice in the hill. ahead and ducked inside. She looked timidly out of the crevice, her eyes searching the horizon for the source of the calamity and desperately seeking her parents. Nothing. She waited. Nothing. Who panted heavily. Her legs twitched from fear and running. She sat in the dark crevice and waited. The moon edged into the purple evening sky. Birds flew quickly back to their nests for the night. In the far distance, Who heard a wolf call, but not her parents. A stranger from a rival pack. Who crept out of the crevice, quietly searching the area for any traces of her parents. Nothing. Who sniffed and found the path the trio had taken earlier that day, leading them far from the safety of their park. She quietly followed the scent, lonely and afraid, into the darkness. As she neared the border of her family's territory, Who called for her parents. "Awoo!" She listened eagerly. No reply. "Awoo!" Desperately she pleaded for an answer that did not come. Please, she thought, please answer. "Awoo!" Who heard leaves rustling next to her. Please be them. She waited. Joy bounded out of the woods towards Who, wagging her tail, and hurrying eagerly to her sister's side. Overwhelming delight fled through Who. She turned to nuzzle her ebony sister. Finally, family. She just placed the tip of her nose on her sister's warm fur when Gracie grabbed her from behind. Joy snarled and stamped at Who's throat. Startled Who stumbled. Gracie leapt on her back and tore at her, biting deep into her flesh. Joy still clamped onto Who's strong neck as Who fought desperately to regain her balance. While she was going with her parents, the two twins had decided to team up and run Who from the pack, securing their place and dominance within the pack. In her misery and loneliness on her journey home, the grief-stricken Who had weakened and did not have her usual strength. She could have easily taken on her two sisters at any other time, but in her time of desolation and despair she could not defend herself. Who flung Joy from her throat and ran. She ran hard back down the long, lonely path she had just trekked, fleeing from the only family she had left. Many days had passed, dark and miserable. Hozuchi called desperately for her parents, careful and fearful of summoning her betraying sisters to her. She crept on miserably, meandering through the park, ever nearing the edge of an invisible boundary of safety. Homeless and alone, she crawled on, hopeful to rescue her lost parents along the way. One evening, Who rested atop a hill, hiding beneath the trees and smelling the freshness of the clean air surrounding her. She watched a human child playing and stumbling in a small patch of grass. Who loved watching humans walk. Funny two-legged creatures, how clumsy. Who rested her head on her front paws, watching the child twirl and giggle. She was regaining her strength. Soon she would return home with or without her parents. She would reclaim her role and fill in as alpha female until her mother returned, if she did indeed return. She would protect her park and her family, yes, even her treacherous twin sisters, Joy and Gracie. She would continue to help the humans with their war on the park, destroying elk, patrolling the land, and picking off some delectable elk. Who would be the guardian, the defender of all the land? The child giggled and squealed with delight and scurried towards the door of the house where the two men stepped out. "Hey, baby," one man patted the child on the head. Who smiled as the child giggled, and a small dog ran from the house into the child's waiting arms, licking the tiny human's round face and wagging its tail. How neat. The humans have a wolf pack too. Who slowly wagged her tail as she gleefully watched the family. Suddenly the small dog stopped wagging its tail and gave an alarmed bark. The child froze and gazed around it. Alert at the tension, Who raised her head to search from the cause of the alarm. The two men looked toward the hill. "Kill every damn one of these stinking demons you can find," he called as he snatched up the child, who hurried onto the wooden porch. "Oh no, don't attack the little human family." "Who is it? Who is the intruder?" "Where's the intruder?" Who searched desperately around the area, her eyes shifting frantically around the house. The second man stepped around and looked up the hill towards the trees where Who now stood, and she searched for the disturbance. Light reflected off a metal pole, and the second man held in both hands, raised to his face. The sky screamed, "Bang!" Heart-pounding, Who fled, racing away from the human pack and into the woods. Oh no, not again. Who felt the loneliness of losing her parents when the sky screamed all over again. She panted heavily, her heart thumping in her chest, trying to burst from her ribcage. She ran. The poor humans, had the bang taken them also? She began to slow as her vision blurred. Her side throbbed horribly. She stopped and stumbled against a tree, yelping as she hit the ground. Looked at her aching side. Redness oozed and bubbled down her side. cascading over her and matting her thick gray fur. She licked the wound hopelessly, dizziness overtaking her. She thought of Nino and Kay and the bang that separated them. It had found her. The scream had taken her parents, and now it claimed her. She looked faintly at the gushing hole, her head swirling and reeling, trying not to vomit on herself. She longed to be home with her sisters and her parents, back in the safety of her park with its invisible borders. As the darkness around her deepened, Hozuchi realized she would never return home. Others note Hozuchi is a Navajo word for meaning living the loving way, or the blessing way ceremony. Kay is the Navajo word for harmony. These are definitions to the best of my knowledge from my internet searches. And that was that particular story. Final thoughts? Definitely sad, and it was interesting to see, for once, a story not about human suffering, but the ways of animals and how their territorial nature, combined with our tenets, us as humans, interfering with the natural order there, can really, make an impact on the life that lives there. We take out the heads of the pack, and then they all start fighting with each other to take the top spots, and then only to meet their own end eventually, be it to gun, disease, each other, or just old age. So, with that, it was a well-written story, and I wouldn't really have any advice on how to improve that particular one. It was decently paced, and it left just enough room for interpretation until the very end. So, that being said, this has been Sadurdays with your host, the Forsaken Scribe, and I hope that at least one of these stories was able to move you and help you feel again. And that's our show for the night. Bye-bye. Alright.